Aloha, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Warrior Women in the World of Entrepreneurship podcast. Today's Warrior Woman guest is Jordan Salcito. She's an award-winning sommelier, and you turned into an entrepreneur having overseen beverage programs for David Chang's Momofuku restaurants, which are huge restaurants. I know them by name from my previous bosses who loved going to the restaurants. So learning that aspect was pretty amazing. And then you've also worked as a sommelier for 11 Madison Park, and then pass the master sommelier blind tasting exam on your first try. So that's all super impressive. And there's so many more things that I would love to go over, but honestly, I'd love to just get right into the conversation. So without further ado, Jordan, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Awesome. So I read up on you too. When you were in college, this was not the intent originally, right? Like you were an English major, I believe. You were a philosophy major. Am I missing anything else in there?
No, those were the focuses. Really, really, helpful, practical majors and minors to go forth into the world.
But did you just why did you choose those specifically? And I know like college, first of all, we're sometimes we just kind of choose things and usually we'll change our major in between.
Yes.
Was that your initial thing? And what did you want to do? What was your aim? What was your dream as young Jordan? You're still young Jordan, but younger Jordan.
I love that. No, I think I remember having this like fuzzy dream of being a marine biologist, but without really understanding why or what that meant, just liking the idea of it. And then in college, my parents had both always said to focus on things that I really enjoyed. And that I think was really amazing advice because I never fell into I felt actually if there was a disadvantage, it was that I didn't go into the world looking for a finance job like many friends did who then had very high paying salaries and could afford to come to the restaurants where I was working. But I always loved what I was learning and with whom I was working. And that had come from my parents. And those first years out of college, I think are often maybe for everyone or maybe just for me, but I think they're so much harder than you anticipate, or at least for me, because I think I'd gone to school that was paid for by my parents, and I always had jobs since I was 14 and 15 when after like the babysitting, so I always enjoyed working and appreciated that. But it's different when you have to work versus when it's like play money. And so I think for me, New York was I graduated right into a recession, and I had this dream of working in publishing and moved to New York without any game plan. I was just sort of like, I'll figure it out. And that led to taking some interviews in the publishing world, but then working at this restaurant that I remember I delivered my resume to probably 20 restaurants, and 19 of them either said no or didn't call me back. And the one that did, it was this restaurant that was like, the manager I remember was this guy named Ron, and this was in the East Village. Ron was wearing like a poorly fitting suit and had a funny mustache, and he was like, he liked that I had once worked at a Houston's restaurant because he had come from that background. So he hired me. And then the restaurant itself, which I won't name it, but it was like, I could tell that so many things about this restaurant were not healthy and like not a good place to be. But just as I was like about to leave, I got promoted with this like salary that was quite wonderful compared to what I had been making as a hostess salary. And then B, there was this announcement that we would start these wine tastings and that I would have to help organize them. And basically it was sort of like a last ditch effort for these owners to save their restaurant by increasing wine sales. And there were all these wines on the shelf that never got opened or sold. And so it was sort of like this thought process that it was an investment in, and I was drawn to that. And it was interesting also because those owners were in this tumultuous relationship. It was this unmarried couple, and like the woman was in the process of getting a divorce from her previous husband, but then she and her new partner had this. Anyway, there was lots going on, and it's funny. I was like, I hadn't thought about this for a really long time, and I had to think about it recently for something, and it resulted in my first exposure to wine tasting, where basically wine tasting was a proxy for these two people to communicate their emotions to one another. And so I think for example, if they were arguing, the wines were angry and closed, but if they were in a good, healthy space, the wines were generous and voluptuous. And they had all these sexy, sensual terms that they would whip out if like
I like them.
things were good. Yeah, it was hilarious. And like, even as a 22-year-old, I was like, this is interesting. But I think the thing that was interesting about it from a wine tasting standpoint is this realization that the way in which we each experience wine is going to be different depending on who we are and what the context is, and that those things truly matter. And of course, now having studied wine analytically, there's a process to it too, which is a different sort of purpose, but that wine is such an interesting communication tool and sort of a tool of self-reflection, as well as all the other things that I love about it, and its ability to connect and bring us together and sort of take us on a journey. It's like wine is so amorphous. It is so able to be so many things, and that really drew my attention.
So what I'm getting from this is you're not passionate about this at all. Honestly, I'm kidding. No, it's incredible. For those of you who are listening, I'm loving watching you go over this just because you have a huge smile on your face. That's like how I am talking about martial arts or music or anything. And you can always tell when somebody loves what they do. And it's amazing. And I'm so happy for you that you have worked so hard to be able to get it to be such a success. Like Drink Ramona, I was just reading people like other than having your programs at Momofuku, like you've had celebrities that have like drank it, that have promoted it. And that's just so incredible. And just, you're such a beautiful person already. Like we literally just met a few minutes ago, and I could just tell that, like, again, you love what you do. You're honest. I'm assuming you run a great team because you say it like it is, but you want it to succeed. And again, just the origins of why you started this, the love and understanding and the complexities of the relationship that wine has within other relationships. So it's the connector sometimes. And you find that a lot in Europe. And that's when people will take their time to just sit down and talk about the wines. I remember going to Portugal, and they would talk about with my best friend and her family. And, these are wines I'd never tasted, but I think their wine's actually quite underrated sometimes.
Totally. And I think we're going to start hearing more about them. I feel the same way. Like anytime you try it, and there's a new, I think, wave of distribution of like these small, super thoughtful producers coming into the US, not just Vino Verde, which is great, or certainly not just port, which I think is maybe like, it's not a thing of the past per se at all, but I don't know too many people who reach for a glass of port in the way that maybe they do reach for a glass of crisp saline white wine that's going to be delicious with.
Yeah, port's got a little bit more complications too.
Oh yeah,
it's a complicated relationship.
It really is.
So, Jordan, just going back, so you started out. Where are you from originally?
So I was born in Denver. So I grew up in Colorado.
Got it. Awesome.
18 years of my life, and then moved east for college, and that was my first time on the East Coast.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm from the East Coast, so I'm from South Jersey.
And now you're West. I love that. Like Cherry Hill neighborhood?
No, actually South, a little more south than that. Bayville it was called, but it was kind of right near, like 15 minutes drive from Seaside and Point Pleasant.
Okay, yes,
my first job was actually at the boardwalk in Point Pleasant. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
My college boyfriend was from Cherry Hill, and then they had a house down the shore in Wildwood.
Okay.
So I got to be pretty familiar. And then one of my college roommates was from Toms River, and it's beautiful. Yeah. It's really a beautiful state.
Toms River is really a lot closer to Bayville than Wildwood would be. But like I said, grew up near the shore in the Pine Barrens. So I think I'd only ever been to New York City 3 times in my whole life before I'd moved there for college. So I went to Pace University downtown.
Oh yes.
And I was a language major first.
I love that. What language did you study?
Spanish and Chinese, the Mandarin.
Wow. So. Those are 2 like incredibly practical languages. That's amazing.
Yeah. I wish I remembered Mandarin now a little bit more, because that would be, I brought my books from home last time I traveled. So I'm in hopes of being able to re-amplify that. But I love Spanish. Spanish is, I always say, el idioma de mi corazón. It's the language of my heart. So
I love that.
I know we could talk all day, Jordan. So, but to help our listeners hear a little bit more today, let's talk about your transition. When did you decide you wanted to go into business for yourself? Was Ramona Drink your first business, or Is that something like, were you experiencing like, did you try other smaller businesses prior to that, and then it just kind of formed into Drink Ramona, or just talk just about that
Yeah,
and your process, like your journey?
totally. What a thoughtful question. All right. So I think the answer is sort of yes to both. Like Ramona is the first company that we've ever had investors in, or that I've ever raised capital for and have had other partners in. But prior to Ramona, I had a small business, and it was really, I think it was like, I think of it as like the training wheels for Ramona, where I never had like the goal of it was always to sort of learn, and also it was called Bellus, and effectively what Bellus did was we worked with small grower producers in Italy that have always farmed organically, but had no exposure to a market beyond their vineyards. And so I was able to partner with them and then share a little bit about the vineyard and the story, and then bring that to the US. And some of them actually, like we made a Falangina that people still ask me about. And we made a frappato called Scopello that people also still ask me about. And frappato, I almost think of as like Sicilian Pinot Noir. It's delicious. It's bright. It's quaffable. We in the office, we always talk about chillable reds. And for me, that's like the ultimate chillable red. But there wasn't, the purpose was never sort of like that, the purpose fulfilled itself. And then I ended up using sort of probably a year and a half or 2 years worth of Bellus and saved up, and ended up purchasing what then became like this sort of all the setup fees and legal stuff, because anything with wine always has to have some lawyers involved. And then our canning fees. So basically that got like this sort of Bellus led to Ramona, in the sense that Bellus was how I was able to pay for that first test batch. And that was back in 2016. But the idea was about a little over a year sooner, where I had just it was this sort of moment in life where many things are happening all at once. And it was, I guess, a moment where what I thought I wanted more than anything was the master sommelier exam. I was like, I want that pin. And I had passed the blind tasting, but I needed to, the way the master sommelier exam works is you have 3 tries to pass 3 different parts, and otherwise you reset. So I passed the blind tasting, and then the second try I didn't pass either one. And then the third try was right after we had opened Co at Momofuku. We had moved Co from this tiny location to the current location where it is now. And I was on the floor every night, and we'd built a really just a beautiful program that I am still to this day so proud of. And I was just very familiar with service, and studied, of course. So anyway, like the day of exam comes, and I pass theory with flying colors, and then service, I answered, like, I know in my heart, like I nailed that exam, like didn't run out of time, like knew every answer. And the feedback that day, which came from this woman that I didn't know very well, but I knew that if I had passed, it would have come from my mentor, this guy, Jay Fletcher. And so anyway, the feedback was like, oh, on her table, the champagne table, she and her fellow judges, whom had never seen me work in a restaurant, didn't think I seemed like myself to them. And it was such crazy advice, because at this point I had taken the exam 2 other times, and I failed service both times. And and learned from it. Like I deserved to fail both of those first times. Once
Sure.
was for running out of time. Once was for totally not being prepared on Spain. And so it was like, oh, it's a Spanish restaurant and everything's from Spain. And I just didn't study Spain like I needed to. So that
General
was not
region.
yeah, I was like, they're going to ask me what the questions I want them to ask me, but that's not how exams work. Um,
Never.
Never, no. And so it was just an interesting kind of moment where I was like, huh, that's weird, because I actually totally felt exactly like myself. And I'm like, never in my life have I been as comfortable on the floor. And even in this weird service obstacle course, like I know that I feel really good about my performance. And so it was this amazing opportunity to actually like step out of myself and be like, what do I want to do with this feedback? Like, do I respect the feedback? Like I've always respected the feedback, but at this point, like it's like here are people who don't know me telling me that the one reason I didn't pass is because I didn't seem like myself to them in a in an environment that's super arbitrary and where I've never felt more like myself. And that was a really cool moment because like if I had done something wrong or if I'd flubbed or whatever, like it would have just been such valuable feedback and I would have learned from it and gone back to the treadmill of studying and all that. But it was like, like no amount of studying or preparation could ever make me seem more or less like myself to a group of people who feel like looking at it one way or another. Like that was just so arbitrary. I mean, since then the court has had some real PR catastrophes, both with a cheating scandal and sexual abuse scandal. So they're really I think they're doing some work. I think like a lot of people have left the court or stepped down, but I think my experience is I'm grateful for the process, and I'm in the end I'm actually really grateful for that moment because that was very liberating, and that was sort of this door that closed. And right after that, I found out I was pregnant with who's now my 6-year-old son Henry, which was terrifying because it wasn't planned, and it was like, now I guess what I have to do is like the thing that I've like been avoiding, which is this idea that had been in the back of my brain, but I never felt like it was a good time to act on it. And then I was like, well, there's no time like now. I have 9 months before my world changes in ways that I can't imagine. And so it was this huge gift.
That's interesting because you would think that like once you got pregnant, my eyes lit up. I did read that you're a mom and philosopher and everything too. But I just didn't, the timing of your pregnancy is just like, whoa, like you're building, and then like, wham. It's like,
wham. Okay. Yeah, nope. It was like, yeah, study. And I was like, I'm going to try and, we'll think about starting a family after I pass this exam that I'm going to pass, because I'm going to study and do the work. And therefore there's like there's a correlation, like work input should equal pin, but that's it. Like sometimes it works like that and sometimes it doesn't. And, yeah, what did I read recently? I was like on a Tolstoy rabbit hole because I actually am still in the middle of listening to Anna Karenina, like sometimes, and like, so I'm listening to it on Audible, and it's like 35-hour commitment in case you have 35 hours and need a way to kill it. I highly recommend the Maggie Gyllenhaal version. But why was I thinking so I'm like Tolstoy, because the way he describes humanity is so on point today. And it's like, this is a man who, and like this is a man who knows women. It's a man who knows men. It's a man who knows it's just his brilliance. I now understand.
He knows people, and
he, he knows people. And he was, I think, nominated, it was like 12 times, I think. It might not be exactly 12, but he was nominated for the Nobel Prize that many times and never won it. But he somehow became like the mentor to the Dalai Lama. And so it's just fascinating. It's like, credentials are important if they're useful, but they can't be a prison. I think that was what I learned from that. And so it was like weirdly liberating.
Yeah. And it's just going back to the timing of your pregnancy too. It's sometimes I think, as a kind of like we were going over before, that outside source or having something else come in that forces you to think differently and have to not act differently, but have to switch up your plans, then it's kind of like, oh, there really is limited time now. Or maybe not necessarily limited time, but now is the time. And
exactly.
Now's the time you need to begin. And now's the time where the fire needs to be lit under your ass. Like,
exactly.
For what you want, you know what I mean? Like you wanted the other things too, but you still had that lingering feeling. You're like, I know I can, or maybe at that time you didn't know that you could do it, but you knew that you had the power to do it. And that's like a fire within your soul that I think doesn't leave, but it becomes more and more frustrating when you can't act on it because you just don't know. Like before, when you were discussing all the kind of the details and you were kind of bypassing it because you were telling your story, and we tend to bypass it because we're like, oh, those are the boring details nobody wants to hear. This is the podcast for it because we need to hear it. We need to understand, like, okay, what are the steps we need to do? Some people might know it. I did not, and I don't have the money to hire a lawyer, necessarily. Of course, I have some friends that are helping me out who are lawyers. And I have, that's why I've created this, because I had a couple of good neighbors and friends that I would talk to who are entrepreneurs who knew better than me. They'd already started their businesses prior, and they'd been within that experience. So I had the privilege to be able to be right there and have them as my resources and just kind of be able to ask them. So that's what this whole podcast is for, is to be able to give that to people who might not be able to afford it, or be just need to hear that it is possible. Like, it can be very overwhelming, but just take it step by step. And if you just kind of consume yourself with that area that you want to be in, just start learning, just learn little bits by little bits. It doesn't need to be everything, but it needs to be something. When I first came here, I got super stuck just being inside every day, because I was between like, okay, do I do all this admin stuff or just go out? But when I go out and train, like, I'm only talking to a few people and maybe getting a number two, maybe talking to no one, even though working out obviously is good for me and good for business. I was like, well, I need to also do a lot of this admin stuff. So you just kind of get stuck in those moments, rather than just having a sort of schedule or list, as I've been told I really should have, and I've been better about it. So that's why when you're passing through the nitty gritty parts of this, you don't have to do that here. Here's the time where, you know what, say what you've had to go through, because that stuff's important. That's what shapes us too. So
that's such a good point. And like, nothing's ever smooth, but I would say, like, it's funny, I'm like seeing even in my life today, it's like some doors just like some things just happen quickly, and it's like it's just easy, whereas like some things you feel like Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill. And this was actually business advice that came through. This was like before I had started Ramona officially. And somebody said, the best advice that I ever got was do what's easy. And that doesn't mean be lazy about it, but it's like for me with Ramona, like my world was restaurants. And so we were really fortunate to have these amazing restaurant relationships and people who support Ramona in restaurants. And that is something that I remember getting advice from someone at some point. They're like, no, you need to focus on really big box accounts. And like, but it's like, well, I don't have any of those relationships. So it was easier to just start where you are and think about your own competitive advantages, because we all have them. We're all our own unique people with our own unique competitive advantages. And the same is true for a team. Like, a team is going to be its own unique entity with its own unique competitive advantages. And so that's one thing. And I think the other piece is like, if it feels too hard or if the door keeps shutting, then look for the window, because it's there. And if you aren't looking for it, you're only focused on the door, you're not going to see all of these amazing opportunities that are always all around.
Yeah, adaptability is huge, especially in martial arts. Like, teaching Jeet Kune Do it's all about adaptability. And
I love that.
I feel like sometimes Jeet Kune Do these days has gotten a bad rap of like kind of like mumbo jumbo stuff, depending on who you ask, depending in the martial arts world, but it's not if you know it, because the whole point of it. So I train and I teach the art and philosophy of Jeet Kune Do.
So cool.
So there is a curriculum to it. There's a core curriculum that we do teach, but it's ever evolving. The arts that we're using, there's so many arts within it, but it's all being put to this curriculum to make it well-rounded, and also to be able to flow together. It's just kind of like, when you're talking or discussing wines in the relationship of the mood, right? So it's somebody had said the other day, I think I was listening to a different podcast, and I think it was Gary Vee, and he was talking about how,
Gary Vee.
Yeah, one of my other my most recent interviews, Carissa Cabrera, so she created the Conservationist Collective here in Hawaii, and she had mentioned him, and I was like, all right, I'll check him out. And he's from Jersey too, so I was like,
yes, he is. Yes, he is.
Like, we just happen to be awesome. Sorry, no, I'm kidding. But so
I married a guy from Jersey. There's a lot to be said.
All right, this is why we get along.
Yeah, good people from Jersey for sure.
But he was saying that I don't remember the exact quote, but he's saying that content changes with context, right? And or context change. Yeah, no, that was it. And I liked that a lot, because I was like, yes, that is correct. Like, because it just like the way that he said it, because that, any content that you're providing has to fit within the context of what you're teaching and what you are still passionate about. Posting is so annoying. Like, I hate the social media crap, and I hate that I have to sit there like in the park or wherever with the camera facing me. I feel like I need to I used to want to even be an actress, but like having to be out there with my own camera crew, I'm like, oh my God, this is embarrassing, but you got to do it, So anyway, sorry, I'm going on to this ramble, but we were talking about just kind of philosophy and whatnot. But what I want to actually not even that. What I want to go back to is you beginning Drink Ramona, right? Going into what was the inception on that? Like, so where did that come about? And then when was the point like, okay, when do I start selling? Is this product ready? So if you can just talk,
Yeah.
I know when you got pregnant, that's
Yeah.
when it changed. So you
Well,
can go.
yeah, and the idea had been there for like a couple years before that, but timing never was right. And so it was like in my mind, it was like someone should do this. Someone should do something that's like wine based. Like I've never thought beer is especially delicious, even like as far back as I can remember. So it's like, what someone should do something like it, like that's an alternative to beer that actually tastes good for people like me, because I can't be the only one. And since wine is my world, it started off as this like fuzzy, someone should do something better than beer. And then I guess it's like nice that it didn't happen until a few years later, because those few years allowed me to crystallize my value system, where it's like, no, there needs to be something that's organic, that tastes delicious, that is sustainable, that makes decisions for the long term. And that's really a fine wine value system. And so I think it was like the knowing in the back of my head that like someone should do this, and then realizing that I was that someone right at the same week where it was like, don't pass the MS, which I'm sure I'm going to pass, then finding out I'm pregnant, and just realizing that this was a moment of change, and I had an opportunity to handle that how I wanted to handle it. And so it was like, all right, what does this mean, and what's the opportunity? And this is all right, the moment's now. And then things started to fall into place quickly. I remember sitting up the night I happened to be in Italy for Bellus. There was a wedding. It was like I was at a wedding that was in Italy right after the exam, and then after that, I tacked a day on to go meet a vineyard supplier partner. If it was that Falanghina supplier, and sitting there in Italy, I was like, why? Because in my mind, it was like, oh, maybe it should be New York wine with New York peaches, because I live in New York and that could be fun. But New York wine was never supposed to grow wine. I mean, there's like wild vines, but really like wine's roots come from Europe. Vitis vinifera is the grape that has not even existed in the US. It's basically almost 100 years, or just over 100 years. And so our wine history is really short. And it's like, that's not it. Yeah, most of the wine that's grown in the US is not organic because the climate isn't right. But in places where the climate is right, it's wildly expensive, and it's not going to make sense. Like, why can't we celebrate a culture that's been doing this so long? And so I was like, here I am in Italy. This makes sense. Like, why wouldn't I start here? Back to the sort of, rather than trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole, just sort of do what's easy. Oh, wait, I'm in Italy. I have these relationships and the wine is delicious. Like, what if we do Zabibo? And started thinking a little bit. And then the name came to me. I remember like that first night I was sitting up in this hotel room by myself. It was like this cute little old monastery. And it was like happened to be in Amalfi, which is like one of my favorite places in the entire universe. And I was just there for this work trip. So it was like sound of the ocean. And I'm just sitting up and like my brain is racing. And all of a sudden it comes to me like Ramona was my little sister's childhood alter ego. But it was really like an alter ego scapegoat. And when she was little, she would just blame anything she did on Ramona in this.
I
But
love
she would
that.
do, yeah, but it was always really clever, like horribly clever. Like she would, and terrible, like horribly clever, as in also horrible. She would take like bags of marbles and just let them loose. Once she did it on the bus, like we rode a bus to like, yeah, so it's like all around these curves in the mountains, and like
Yeah, I
to
was gonna
see the
say
bus driver.
in
Was like,
Colorado, oh my God. Meanwhile,
so
probably
that,
cold where it was sometimes. So it's
yeah,
like extra.
yeah,
Oh my God. It was
yeah. But
Ramona.
it was Ramona, exactly. So it's not me. Talk to Ramona. And so it was this idea of like a high integrity alter ego to the fine wine world, where it's like, okay, we're gonna have fine wine values, but we're gonna be for anyone, anytime, anywhere. And yeah, that was where the name came from.
Which is super relatable too. I mean, more or less, it's just siblings too. I have a brother; he's 5.5 years older than me, and it's just growing up with siblings. It's funny to look at it years later and to see how your relationships have developed, or
Yes.
not in some cases, which is sad.
Yes.
But it's if they get to, and you get to see each other grow up and be like. But now it's funny because now it's like your sister gets or she, is honored, I guess, with the Ramona, and probably is like, that's interesting to use that. So it's like,
Totally.
who's using Ramona now? But no, that's incredible. So when I had a question before, sorry, just going back to that nitty gritty. So you got pregnant, and then you were in Italy and you thought about the name, which is amazing. So what were your steps thereafter? So did you already LLC? No, because you had to have the name first. So you had the idea, you were pregnant, you were at the wedding, name came to you. Did you came back home and started all like the legal processes, like to make that a name and get all those licenses and all those things?
Exactly. And that part took a while. Like all those things always take longer than you think they will. And like occasionally, like 1 out of 10 will be shorter than the rest. And that's always like something to celebrate. But yeah, so there was all that stuff, which I got in motion. And then I think the role of Bellus, if I look back, 2020 is hindsight's always 2020. The Bellus, there were a number of things that I learned from that were certainly like mistakes I learned from. And I remember I didn't really love Bellus, the name. It was sort of like, well, it's the name. And then I really didn't like the first label because I didn't trust my intuition. I was like, I'm not a designer. I don't know this. So I let somebody else do it it was just fine. But it was just like, I didn't love it, but I didn't know enough to articulate or to trust that I could, I wasn't confident in my opinion yet. And so then I had this label that I sort of hated the entire role of its existence. And then we changed it and I liked the label better, but the name was still the name. And I just knew, then I started getting more specific or just more intentional, where it's like everything I do with this brand, like will be very intentional. There will be a why behind every decision and I will love it. And I knew I needed to love the way the label looked. And once I heard the name Ramona, I was like, okay, it's retro. Inspiration was like, it's just funny because it sort of came from a few places, but I asked my friend Claudia, who had been the co-founder of a magazine called Cherry Bomb, and I just loved her aesthetic. And I felt like she took this magazine, she and then her co-founder, Carrie Diamond, had taken this idea for a magazine that celebrated women in food and wine to a lesser extent. And her aesthetic was amazing. And I just asked her one day and she was game. She was like, yeah, sure. And so I sent her some initial inspirations and it came back and it just was not right. And I knew at that point enough to like not settle for anything that I didn't love. And I was like, Claudia, maybe hey, here's what I'm thinking. Like, here's the sort of purpose of this. What do you think? And she came back with this brilliant idea that's very much still the core of our design today, which is the sort of inspiration from the Russian constructivist movement, which was the celebration of art for everyone, sort of art for the people, and this belief that art or fine art does not belong to just collectors or people who study art or people who can afford a fancy artwork in a gold frame, that art is for everyone. And so these posters would go up on the sides of trucks and buildings, and they were sort of for everyone everywhere. And that was how we've always thought about Ramona. It was like, no, this value system shouldn't just be reserved for people who know better. This is the right way to do things. Why are so many beverages, especially now in the RTD market, like things are not grown organically, things are grown with ground up, things are treated like anything in the US. We actually moved production out of the US because I learned about Velcorin during our test batch. And I was said, what is this? And was told, oh, don't worry about it. And then had the opportunity to look into it further. And it's a neurotoxin. It has to be administered with a hazmat suit. It cannot be consumed within the first 24 hours or you could die. And it breaks down to CO2 and methanol, and it literally hydrolyzes into formaldehyde. So you're drinking formaldehyde. Yeah, in so many of these things, and it doesn't have to be disclosed on labels. So there were a lot of those things where—
And it does not have to be disclosed on labels.
No, it was introduced in some loophole through the chemical lobby. And so it's crazy because in Italy, we just pasteurize our cans in warm water, and that technology is not available in the US. Wow. So yeah, and so but I had to be there for canning to learn about that because and like if you Google it, there's you'll find a little bit here and there, but so much of it has to do with like propaganda from the Velcorin people trying to sell you Velcorin. And so it's like, yeah, seltzers, hard seltzers are treated with that, and it's just something that it's fine, but for me as a consumer, It's like, I don't want that. I don't want that in
No,
my body, and I don't want that in the planet. And
not until
as a
later.
yeah, I want to like know what I'm getting into when I sit back and relax, enjoy my afternoon beverage kind of thing.
Yeah. And
Um,
formaldehyde, every time I hear it, all you think of is the preservation after someone dies. You're
oh
like,
yeah, oh
that's how
totally,
my,
like
so I've been,
science class.
yeah. So I had another
Yep.
guest on here. I think she was my first guest, Jessica Krupa, and she's got a panty brand. It's all cotton and organic. She works with a fabric company in Italy,
Love
and
that.
it's same thing she was saying, because I mean, us as females, like there's issues that happen and we don't necessarily know why, and it's like, okay, you go to a
Yep.
gynecologist and they'll be like, well, just have some more probiotics, pH balance,
Yeah.
it's okay, but why? It's
Yeah.
like what you're saying, like there's a
Yep.
why behind every decision, and I kind of want
Yeah.
to go into a little bit more of that with you too. But so she was explaining to me, she's like, well, yeah, they use formaldehyde on like Victoria's Secret underwear or really any
Wow, I
other
didn't know
underwear
that,
that's
but that
there.
does not surprise me.
Right.
Formaldehyde
So,
on Victoria's Secret underwear totally doesn't surprise me.
and I would wear that, like, whatever, TMI for everyone who's
Yeah.
listening, but like,
Yeah.
working
Yeah.
out or whatever, like, because we're
Yeah.
running from place to place. We're not going to necessarily like switch every time. So wearing that, and she's like, yeah, there's formaldehyde and other like chemicals within it, among other issues, like the gusset doesn't even go up high enough to protect the areas we're supposed to protect. So her whole brand is that. But it just reminded me of you because she recently went to Europe as well and checked out the factory that she's using. And I
Yep.
think I'm not sure if they're smaller scale or bigger scale, but either way, she got to go in there. She talked to them. They were impressed that she knew exactly
Yep.
what she was
Yep.
doing. And just like yourself, you're keeping the integrity and again, honoring the product and what you're trying to give, and just trying to have people be healthy. Who wants that in their body? Fran
And who
Drescher
wants
comes
that in
up
the
with that too.
planet? No, I think like we talk a lot about like we want to make and drink beverages that care about the health of our bodies and the health of our planet, and that's the only way to think right now. I mean, like with the news cycle, the way that the news cycle is, and it's sort of like, why would we turn a blind eye? Like, we are leaving this world to next generations, and yeah, are we really so careless? And I think like that's why Ramona exists, is like currently that's not happening in the beverage space. And so I think of this as like our opportunity to show that there's another way, that you don't have to use Velcro, that you don't have to, work with pretend ingredients and like call it natural, or like put the word pure, which is like wildly meaningless, or like drink clean, which is equally meaningless. Like, start
Yeah.
backing it up, make the
Yeah.
right decisions, invest in our planet, invest in our teams, invest in the health of, and just invest in health, our bodies, our teams, our planet. And that's the right direction.
So it's hard though, right? Because it's like, okay, we try to change certain things for those who are conscious of it. Other people are like, who gives a fuck about the next generation? I'm living for the now. It's just like, okay, well, your now is shit too, because it's
Yeah.
changing very rapidly with our climate change.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
whether you believe in science or not, science is science, facts are facts. Like, I mean, okay, science is ever evolving and it's changing, but what are the findings now? It's not usually true, but it is what it is. And yes, it is going to change, but right now they are showing you that the pattern is changing to the negative. So it's just
It's
paying attention to
scary.
that. So it's good
Yeah.
that your company, that Drink Ramona, is paying attention to that. So my question in that, sorry, was, if these companies don't have to put it on their ingredients, where, or do they have to list it somewhere, or no, it's
No,
just like we have
it
no
does not
idea
have to
who
be
has
listed
it or
anywhere.
doesn't? So
So
how do we
I
know
can
that Drink Ramona doesn't have it?
Well, you're welcome to come to the canning facility with me. It's in Italy, and you're welcome to join.
Sold.
No, and that was yeah. It's like I went there for our first canning run, and like, yeah, you see the can and you see it go through this, the wine. There are spritz goes into the cans. The can gets topped. The top gets sealed, and then it goes into a warm water bath. And it's basically like a tunnel of warm water, and that's the pasteurization.
So I guess for any
And
other company, you could always look up like their canning facility. Like that's probably information that you could
yeah,
find.
true. And I will say this, currently, it is not possible to make a canned product with any amount of residual sugar in the US. That technology is not available. And it seems to me, and I don't know this for certain, but like, I get outreach from these places all the time, like, hey, we see that you make cans. We have a canning line. It's brand new. And it's like, great. we don't use Velcorin. So I just want to confirm that that's true for you too. And they're like, well, Velcorin's actually not bad. Or like, to my knowledge, it is not possible to make. In fact, we know of other companies that are trying to do something similar in the US, but they want to can it stateside and they've not figured out how to do that. So they're like, that Ramona seems like a good idea. And it's nice to know that we're onto something. But I think, yeah, it's scary to me that there's not the technology. And actually, we did look into buying this used tunnel pasteurizer that it was like in Ohio, and we were gonna truck it over to New York, and we were gonna, try and do this. But in the end, the amount of logistics and headache to do something stateside that may or may not actually work or come to fruition, it just made no sense. We're like, we're able to use ingredients that we're much, much more excited about in Italy. So like our blood orange is made from organic Sicilian blood oranges. Our lemon is organic Sicilian lemons. The ingredients that we're like, our Amarino is basically like our answer to an Aperol spritz, or one of those classic Italian spritzes. And Aperol was purchased by Campari in 2003, at which point the recipe changed. So it used to be dyed with little tiny insects called coccinelle. The ingredient is called carmine. And we thought about that, but in the end, it can't be labeled organic for some reason. So we're like, no, we're not going to do that. And also vegan, it's then wouldn't be vegan. And we've learned that a lot of people want something that's vegan. But Campari, when Campari bought Aperol, they changed the recipe. So now it's sugar. It's 79 grams per liter of residual sugar. And then it's colored and flavored with artificial ingredients. And the color comes from coal tar. It's a coal tar derivative, which is a petroleum byproduct. And coal tar is part of this a group known as class 1 carcinogens. So it's like, as long as it's in small doses, it's not a big deal. But like, that just keeps adding up, like that with the formaldehyde underpants, with the
especially if you like what you drink, like not that you should be drinking it like that often, but still, it's just like those small doses, like you said, it build up, and it's like, oh, it's just a small dose. That stuff stays in your body, even if you don't see it right away. It's those little bubbles that build up, like anything fitness, right? Like in a good way, it'll build up, and also in a bad way. If you start like avoiding your training and you start not doing it, then you start to see that, and it goes into that other side. So backtracking, just maybe not backtracking, but backtracking a little bit. I was going to say it's more expensive, I guess, to go the route that you're going, and it'll pay off in the end, both for health and just in general. But how have you been able to, I guess, from inception, was it money that you made from Bellus, or even before that, how were you able to start Bellus? And then how were you able to continue on with Ramona financially? Were you still maintaining a full-time job? Were you, how did you basically fundraise for that essentially?
Yes. So we fundraised for Ramona starting in fall. I guess it was like January 2017. So I had what I knew is that I had had a bunch of conversations with Momofuku, and that was a really wonderful transition where the teams had said, "Hey, we really want you on board for whatever you're willing to be part of this." And so we found a scenario that worked out really, really well, where I was able to sort of get Ramona's test batch up and running and think about distribution, and it ended up selling out. And then we moved production to Italy. So we were sort of out without product for 2017. And then it was really, I guess it was like then right as soon as our Italian batch landed, 6 weeks later, I got an email from the head of Whole Foods saying, we want to include Ramona in our summer program next year. And so I had raised we call it pre-seed round now, basically friends and family round, of just people in my world, mostly through wine, who knew about the idea, had either heard about it from me or from one of their friends, and put together a small seed round. And then when we learned about Whole Foods, that's when we raised another round, and we were able to use that for production and to sort of think about building out the team a little bit more. And we've been really lucky. It's fun. It's like one of those things where I do feel like there's some universe stuff out there that's like beyond my control, but we've definitely had some scarier moments where it's like, how are we going to pay for this next canning run? Because one of the challenges is paying for everything up front.
Yeah.
Whereas in the US, you get the cans and then you pay 30 days later. Whereas we pay for everything months before it actually lands, and like with container delays, and that's a challenge that we're always focused on. But at the end of the day, and this is like why it will sound very cheesy, but it's like every time I'm like, how are we going to figure this out? Then some miracle comes along, and like exactly what we need works out. Like there was this one day last summer where it was like, we need an extra 100 grand for canning Amarino. And it was like just the series of events that never could have been scripted, where it was like the wind blew down the truck of the and so it was like we didn't end up having to make the payment in time, so we were able to use exactly what we need. Like it all worked out perfectly, and then Amarino sold out in 24 hours, and like it was a sort of hit from day one. And so I think it all worked out as it should, which doesn't mean there aren't successful or stressful moments, but I think like that's when I think about it, it's like, okay, it's really like door open, door shut, and doors shut all the time. Like, I have a list of 1,000 ideas.
Yeah.
Petey, my colleague, our director of ops, she and I came up with this list yesterday, and it's like, but it's crazy because it's like, even just writing it down, we're realizing once we shifted focus to like, we're like, what is it that we want to do? And then things started, not what should we do, but what do we want to do? And then things start falling into place in ways where it's like, okay, this is in alignment.
Yeah.
And I guess like alignment is, I believe in alignment.
That's so awesome. There's so much to attack in what you just said. First of all, it's funny because one of our other Warrior Women guests as well, April Parks, she's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. They're opening up a school up in Syracuse with her and her partner. And she's also created a company called Grappling Getaways. But she said the same thing. It was just like you put it out there in the universe, and not that it solves itself. Like you have to actively be working towards that, but sometimes you do get thrown a bone. And yes, like you said, just kind of like the alignment of everything. And sometimes the alignment is off, but it's really nice when you just put it out there, you're writing it, you're trying to figure it out, and just something happens to where it does sort itself out. But you have to be careful in those moments too, because it's just like, oh, phew, okay. And then but don't get used to that moment of relaxation either. Like stay on top of it, remember how it felt, and try to work towards that. And that's more of self-talk over here. And then just going back into, I also just yesterday was talking to somebody, I think we commented on a post, and she's like, as artists, somebody else, another Warrior Woman guest, she was posting, Madeline Shane, she was posting saying like, as artists, we're always saying like, oh, I feel so uninspired. She's like, meanwhile, we've got like 10 or 20 unfinished projects that we're working with, but we just don't want to touch those. Like, oh, we need something shiny and new. And it's like, it's like alone, we were doing like 8 different things in 2 different rooms. And it's just like, okay, refocus. Like, what do you want what needs to be done first as well? Like prioritizing, like what's going to make you money for what you need it, right? Like, not that it should be all about money, but that's a big thing for comfort and stability. So, what's going to make you money, number one, within what you have to do, get that done first, and then focus on, okay, what do I want to do with this? Where do I want it to go? And I just want to go back into, again, earlier you said the why in every decision. So can you just kind of go into that a little bit more in your mentality with the why in your decisions?
Yeah. Well, I think what you just said is so salient too, because there can be whys in decisions that are more and less important. So I think having like some sort of internal ranking system, like you just described, right, where it's like, what is the first most pressing need? Okay, let's do the thing that like checks that off the list first. And sometimes you have days that are really hard where it's like everything feels important and like there are only so many hours. But sort of thinking about that first most important thing, right? Thinking about that first most important thing, and then within that, figuring out like, does it align with your value system? And that's something that we did spend a fair amount of time on, is just writing down our value system and making sure that we are clear on that. I think part of that came through just intuitively knowing what it is. And then we definitely experimented. I think that's another thing, that a good lesson that I learned, there was, it was like, and it came through a friend of one of our investors. So it was like this introduction to somebody, and I was introduced to this person. It's like, this person knows everything about wine. uh, and building a wine company. And like, meanwhile, that person has an opposite value system. And so it's like, really,
Yeah.
this guy, I don't know, this feels weird. And that's like, I guess like I had to learn that lesson the hard way too. It's like, if it feels weird, or if there's like a tiny even hint of like shadiness about something or some feeling, like the answer is like, run away from that, because that's not in alignment.
Yeah.
And so just learning to listen to that little voice and that intuition is super important.
Yeah, it's so, again, you're talking about alignment. If I say again one more time, I'm going to slap myself. But it is that whole alignment. And I'm not even trying, I have not done this as much in other interviews where I've mentioned all of like the warrior women guests that we've had on, but we've had so many incredible ones, but literally everything you're saying is just kind of summing up all of them, which is amazing. And we had just interviewed author Kristen Britton, like this week it was released. And we were just talking about how when you have to essentially sell your work, right? There's just going to be companies that want to change the integrity of it, change everything. And they may offer a bigger check, but you can also go with the other company that may be offering you a little less. Don't go too far on the lesser side, but if they're offering you enough that you can settle on, and they're going to honor the work, the integrity, and your value system, that's the one to go with, because you're going to regret the other one in the end. Yeah, it might be nice to have that money up front or just along the way, but you're just going to sit there and look at it and be like, that's not my work though. That's not what I wanted for it. And that stays with you. I mean, maybe some of you can live with it. You're like, done. I'm on to the next thing. Cool. Great. If that's what you do, then that's what you do. But if this is something that you've put your heart and soul into, just like Jordan's saying, you want to make sure it supports your value systems. Don't ever compromise that for like a pretty penny, because you'll just regret it later, and also might sully your business. It just might be that energy that just sneaks in and destroys everything. And you're like, what is this invisible thing that's just like a weight on us? So learning that and understanding and sticking to your guns, sticking to your core values. And again, just understanding the why in each decision, I think is a very important, I just stuck in my mind because I'm like, okay, but wait, okay, decision. Let me ask why. I think that's a good thing to think about. Could you, like, what's an example for you of like when you've done that? Like what's a decision you thought about and then had to ask like yourself?
Okay. Just earlier this year, a couple months ago, there was a can delay because cans are very popular, and we switched canning partners to a new canning partner that is more high, like has a higher integrity product, but prints less regularly. And so we had a Zoom call with our Italian winery partner, and the conversation was BPA free lining. So most cans have BPA, which is a toxic plastic lining. And we have always stayed away from that. And the conversation was, well, what happens if we do BPA? Like it's cheaper and it's available now. So that was it was like a moment we paused for a moment. We're like, is it like, it sounds like everyone else is doing it, so maybe we should too. And by the way, it's available now. And then we are, and then it's not something that, what if we miss our summer season? What if we're out of lemon for summer or for the launch of Disney, or, all of these cool things that are up in the works. And in the end, we said, no, that's, right. We're not going to lie. We don't do that. We just don't. So, yeah, it would be more convenient if that weren't one of our values, but it is.
That's
we have to live our values.
Hard. Yeah, it's extremely hard as a business owner, because again, you got to think of it like a connecting flight, right? If you miss that connecting flight for whatever reason, you're either going to have to pay for another one, or you're going to have to wait. And then it's just going to be one thing after the other. And then whoever's picking you up, or the ride, or whomever, it's all just going to kind of flow out of, it's going to be resolvable. It's always resolvable. It's not the end of the world, but it could be the end of certain things. So it's a hard decision to make. But again, in the end, like you said, things work out if you choose what's right for you and your company. And if it doesn't, you're still willing to work with what you're given. So you guys figure out a way. There's so many more questions, but time's running out. So what I would like to ask you is, just from our whole conversation today and for our listeners, what would be the one thing or a few things that you want our listeners to take away from our conversation today? And in general, is just beginning entrepreneurs at your level, and just anyone.
Yes, I think it's important to have a problem to solve because because you're going to have to be telling the story of why you're doing what you're doing. So whether it's, and it doesn't have to be a specific problem that nobody else is solving, but just know why it is you're doing what you're doing and be really clear about that and really believe that it's valuable, that it makes a difference, even if it's a difference to one person and that person is you. And I think like the difference would be like doing something because you think you should, or because your parents want you to, or somebody, because if you do that, then that's like in retrospect why I wanted the MS exam. I was like, I wanted that pin so that I could, but it wasn't for the right reasons. So I think if you can do whatever you're doing in service to something bigger, then that is always a winning strategy.
And it's happened again, folks. We've had another technical issue with the computer dying out prematurely. So unfortunately, it cut Jordan off right at the pass when she was giving us some critical advice on what she wanted us to gain from all of our conversation today. But you know what? It was such a great conversation. There's so many nuggets of knowledge and wisdom that you can gain from today. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. And please be sure, if you liked it, to be sure to reshare, tag us at TascoFit, and you can hashtag Warrior Women in the World of Entrepreneurship or the WWWE podcast. You can find Jordan and also Drink Ramona at drinkramona.com, as well as on any social media platform that they're up on, like Facebook and Instagram. It's on there as Drink Ramona. The can itself says Ramona on it, so that's the company, but Drink Ramona is usually what their names are going by for any sort of media. And then Jordan herself is on there as Jordan Salcito. So I hope you guys are able to find her, support her and her company, and enjoy the product that she's worked so hard to make sure is safer for you guys and just keeps its integrity within this crazy world of pressures that is really hard to avoid sometimes, but they're doing it and they're sticking with it. So definitely a great company to be able to look into and a great founder. So it's always important. All right, guys, tune in next episode on Monday. Aloha.